Hey, good afternoon, guys. Yep, we're back, and now it's time to go digging for oil. So we're going to start at the top of the engine because there was so much oil on both sides of the engine, all the way down to the oil pan, and on the front of the motor, and all the built-up grease and things. We're going to start with the real basic stuff and start at the top. So, first thing I'm going to do is mark the spark plugs, which are still filthy. Now the engine bay has been cleaned, but it hasn't been detailed. So I should have done this, I didn't. Serves me right. So we're going to mark them now. We got number 1. Number 2, number 3, number 4. I just find it easier to do this up front rather than fart around afterwards. So let's pull the plug wires and take a look at them while you're at it. If it's something we're going to deal with later, might as well find out now and we can order plug wires. They haven't been off in a very long time. Once we find the oil leak, I think we'll be taking a look at the rest of the tune-up on this poor girl. So, we'll lift these out of the way for now. So, starting at the top, let's start with the cap. Now, the gasket's pretty beat up, but it doesn't look like it could have been pumping that kind of oil. So we're going to set it aside and make a new gasket for it. The other thing we're going to check as long as we're here is how the cap fits. It's fitting nice and tight. It's looking good. I'm not seeing any gaps, no rock. So I think we can probably eliminate that one. So the next step's the valve cover. Somebody has way over tightened on here, which is not a good sign. You don't want to over tighten valve covers and valve cover gaskets. When you over tighten them, it actually squishes the gasket to the point it distorts it and can create leaks. So it makes me a little suspicious that, wow. This could be a case of the valve cover getting overly compressed. Because that's extremely tight. It should be work to get these off, but this is kind of extreme. And I'm seeing now the washers are kind of squished. Also not a good sign. Here we got one that was nowhere near as tight. We'll see what this poor beast looks like. And again, nowhere near as tight as those first two. Don't like the looks of that. And that's really loose. Notice how I'm laying everything out so it's easy to find. No, to be honest, I'd be happy if we discovered that it was this easy. I have a hunch it's not, but We'll find out pretty soon. Now, let's see how this comes off. Oh my, stuff falling already. Let's see what we got right out of the bin. Well, the valve cover edges seem to be kind of mucky. We're going to check those out. What have we got here? Okay, let's take a look at the gasket. Now, if you look really close, you're going to see where it should be flat when it's down on the head. This one's actually dished. If you look really close, you can see how it was so tight up here that it forced the valve cover into the gasket, curved the bottom edge, made a mess out of it. And at the back less so, but still there. And it's pretty much the same on both sides. Good news is there's no breaks in the gasket, but makes me real suspicious this could be a major contributor. We're going to replace the valve cover gasket anyway. Now, while we're here, let's take a look at the inside of the engine. And what you'll see, and I'll bring the camera in close in a second, this thing's super clean. So the mileage makes sense on it. There was no doubt in my head, because I know the history of the car, that was the accurate mileage. But as you can see, when you get real in and personal, super clean. Really nice shape. Lots of clean oil. Timing chain's in really good shape. So we know shouldn't have to go deep on this motor. But that said, I'm not convinced that's our oil leak. So the next step is going to be to take a hard look at the other things on the top of the engine. So we're going to take a short break while I get organized. We're going to pull the PCV lines and check the crankcase ventilation system. Okay, now that we've safely set the valve cover items out of the way and have all the nuts and bolts in a nice safe place, we're going to pull the PCV line. This is the excuse me, the brake line, and just check and make sure that the check valve's working, which it is. And then we're going to take a look at the crankcase breather line, which is all the way down over here. Which goes off into nowhere, which is really odd. It's going to be an odd day, I take it. So while I clean this up, we'll wander over to our other engines. Just make sure that we're looking in all the right places. Not. Is there disconnect? Okay. So one of the advantages of having several engines floating around is to take a look and see where everything's going. And somebody has bypassed this whole system. So we're going to have to take a little break while I do some homework and make sure everything's coming together properly here. We'll be right back. Okay guys, this is the engine that we just pulled out of the other TR7. It's still complete. So it makes for a wonderful reference piece. Now, to give you an idea what somebody had done on the 79 we're working on, you can see here there's the tube, rubber tube that runs into the EGR valve, then goes around and underneath and back up here to carburetor vacuum. That's part of the positive crankcase ventilation system. And that's what keeps undue pressure out of your crankcase and recycles the vapors back through the carburetor. And it's an important piece of your system. There's just no two ways around it. What somebody had done was to take this with the end restricted and attached it here and just dropped it down the side. Well, that accounts for a lot of the mess that we were seeing underneath the car when we were cleaning it, all the way back onto the transmission and all over the place. There was no positive crankcase ventilation system, and that's a problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces off of this engine, clean them up, and transfer them to our 1979, because that will be, maybe not the whole problem, but it's part of the problem with the oil leakage that we were getting. So while we take this off and clean it up, we'll take a short break for you to go grab another one of your favorite beverages. Okay, we're just going to stop in while we're cleaning parts, because as I've dug through this and discovered the pieces that were missing, one of the pieces I found missing was the PCV valve. Now, I was mistaken. This hose is not running to the EGR. The PCV valve box is actually behind here, attached to the EGR. So I've got to get in here and get these little bits and pieces out and install them on our car so that we can solve this problem. Somebody went to a lot of work to go around the PCV system, and I really don't understand why. So we're going to keep working away here. What we're going to have to do is take these two bolts off, lift this out of the way, grab the PCV, put it into the other one, and that should solve our crankcase ventilation issue. So we'll be back shortly once all the parts are cleaned up and ready to go on. Okay, we've got all the parts pulled off the old engine. They've been cleaned and painted, and they're being touched up. I also painted the shroud for the cold air to the interior. If you're doing a job like this and you've got to take this much apart, you might as well make it look good going back together. So even though we're using used parts, they've all been cleaned and put back together. Now, you'll also notice, seeing as I had a couple of minutes, we've cleaned up the plug wires and kept them numbered and marked and treated each one with a little bit of preservative. Use your favorite. And while we're waiting, time to pull some spark plugs. Spark plugs are great. They tell you a huge amount about what's going on in the engine. So we'll pop these off and take a look at what's going on in her. While we were at it, we also cleaned the plug wire holders and gave them a quick scoot of paint. We've cleaned the engine, but we haven't detailed it. We'll do that in a different segment. But you want to have it, you want to try and keep it at least as clean as it is now. When we get around to building engines, you'll quickly discover I hate black colored engines or super dark colored engines. See, and there's a good looking spark plug. It's dirty, but the color is just right. That's number one. I like bright colors. I love aluminum blocks. If it's a cast iron block, I always want to paint it a light color, because that way when you do get an oil leak or you get a coolant leak, it's easy to trace and it's easy to find. I know, especially when I used to build a lot of GMs and Fords and Chryslers, everybody wants to paint their motor back to stock colors. You know, the Chevy reds or blues, Ford blue, Chrysler orange. But you know, that blue on Fords makes it tough to track a leak. The oranges and reds, they're really cool. Black, I never paint a block black. Just because if I got to work on it and if I got to track a leak, I can't find it. And a light color block makes it much easier. Another one that's looking good. So far it's telling us that this engine is pretty happy inside, in spite of the fact it's blowing oil all over the place. And I'm having a hunch we may, just maybe, between the two things we found with the valve cover gasket and the PCV system being bypassed, we might have found the biggest parts of those problems. So, like I said, while we're here, we'll have a peek at the spark plugs and see how happy they are. There we go. Another one, though dirty, is a nice color, but that one's pretty dirty. And again, you know, regular maintenance, particularly with a British car. Like I told the previous owner of this one, who I've known for many years when he bought it, you gotta futz with English cars. And that means keeping up the maintenance, and nothing difficult, just you gotta keep on them and keep an eye on them, or you run into trouble, which is what's happened here. Now, he's not a bad guy, he's got a busy life, and he kind of fell behind. But once you fall behind, it's really tough to catch up. So I have a day job too. I get it. It's just you got to keep up with these things, especially on old English cars. Another nice spark plug. So we know the internals of the engine appear to be running really well. That's a big plus. Makes me a lot more comfortable. So while the paint's drying, and we've now had a look inside, we're going to take a break and come back when our valve cover gasket arrives and the paint's all dry. We'll talk to you then. Okay, just before we shut her down for the day, I decided to clean the spark plugs and took them on the wire brush and using a couple of other tools. We got them all nice and clean. And normally I'd change the plugs, but I don't have a set sitting out here in the far west. So I want to give this engine every benefit. So we cleaned them up. Now we're going to gap them. And all gapping is doing is setting the distance between the electrode and the ground. And that determines the size of the spark. And that's often dictated by how strong your ignition system is. And an old car like this, it ain't that strong. So we're at 32. Again, 32. 32. 32. Now, these ones didn't really need adjusted, they cleaned up well, but if I needed to open them up, I'd use this tool in the adjusting area here to bend it upwards to open it up. If I need to close it up, I'd tap it on the back like that, tap it on the back like that to close it up. You want to be gentle with these. So, like I said, they're all set at 32. We're going to spin them back in, and then we'll be back when our parts are dry and the valve cover gaskets arrived. Okay, so here we have all our bits and pieces for reinstalling the PVC system. And these are all used parts off of one of my spare engines. So this is the connector can and sequence that splits up the vacuum. These are the connections to go to the carburetors, and this one will run to the vacuum canister, and then it'll be back to stock. With this particular car, I want to keep it stock. It's too nice to be messing with. You know, I have another TR7 for doing that with. And with only 77,000 kilometers, I really do want to keep this one looking pretty and looking original. So when we took the parts off, we took a few minutes and gave them a good cleaning. A little bit of paint and make them look really good. Much the same can be said with the cover for the cold air vent. It only takes a minute to give something a wash and a coat of paint. If you're going to be doing a job, take the time to do it like a craftsman and do it well. While we were waiting for this stuff to dry, we also cleaned the spark plugs, gapped them, put them back in, and rerouted actually reconnected the vacuum advance unit. And we'll give you a quick look at how we did that as well. Basically, somebody had disconnected it, and I wish I knew who, because it was a really silly thing to do. And then stole the vacuum line to hook up to the EGR, and it's the wrong line for it. So we've run a new vacuum line from here up through here to the correct port. We've reconnected the EGR to the port it's supposed to be on, and now all that's left to do is hook up all the pieces that we can for the PCV valve. So we're going to dive in and start to do that. So we need to start by removing these crude plugs that somebody put on. Sorry about that. There was only room for either me or the camera in there, and it needed to be me this time. Now, and you'll see here, we now have these hoses in place and this connector. Now we're going to put on the junction box at the back. Now to do that, need to remove the vacuum line from the EGR, so, and get in there, crack a couple of bolts loose. And they can be a little awkward, of course. And you just have to be patient and keep working it. And be prepared to drop the wrench once or twice, just for entertainment value. Okay, and while we work these off a quarter turn at a time, we'll be right back when we've got them done. There we go. Bolts were a little bit of a hassle. We're going to clean those up. As you can see, they were a little bit tough shape. So we're going to give them a quick squirt. But before we do, we're just going to trial fit to make sure all our hoses are going to fall where we need them to. And we wiggle our parts into place. Yep, this hose will be going right down to there. This one goes up to the valve cover. This one goes to the vacuum canister, so we're in good shape. So a couple of squirts of lubricant and we'll put her back together. And we line everything up. And in she goes. Now, anytime you're doing this kind of work, you really want to make the effort to do it well and take your time. A sign of craftsmanship is not just swapping parts and leaving it dirty, but tidying it up and making it look like the day it was born, which is easy to do with a newer car, not so much when we're getting into stuff this age. But as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of effort to wind up with a really good product. A little bit of homework maybe, but not a lot of effort. And we'll finish tightening these down with the wrench and be right back. There we go. And we now have the jar back in place with the line splitter for the PCV system. And just wiggle this sucker on there. Like so. This one goes on right there like so. And this one goes on right here. When the valve cover goes on, it ties right in. And the last piece of the puzzle is this line, which goes from here to the charcoal canister right here. I'm still having a tough time believing that they don't have clamps. But apparently from the factory, according to the manual, they didn't. So we're going to do it their way, but if I get any difficulties at all, we're going to go back to using clamps like I'm used to doing on other cars. We're just going to shorten this up. Again, no point in leaving a mess. Tidy things up, make it look good, keeps things out of the way, keeps things pretty. And speaking of that, we have one more clamp to put on, and it's the one that holds the hose in the back, and it actually just holds the hose in the middle. So we'll grab that. And our trusty little wrench. This goes right around here per the factory, and then down into here. Like so. Go. Hi there. Sorry about the camera failure in the previous couple of seconds. Unfortunately, these things happen. Didn't realize we were that low on power, and a little bit of camera error there as well. But she's all buttoned up except for the valve cover now. So let's look at what we did. We've put the complete PCV system back into place. We've got everything attached, all the factory brackets in the right place, all the hoses going to the right places. We've rehooked up the vacuum advance and cleaned up the plug wires. They're ready to go back on. Everything's there to button her up again. So we're going to end up waiting a couple of days for the valve cover gasket. Once it arrives, it'll only take a short time to finish buttoning her up, and then we'll check and make sure we've killed our oil leaks off. All the evidence suggests we got it. Now we got to fire it up and make sure. So we'll be back in a few days as soon as the parts arrive, and we'll go from there. Once that's done, then it'll be time to detail the engine bay a little better. It's very clean now, but it's not a detailed engine bay. There's things like cleaning up the coolant tank, cleaning up the little bits of dirt and things that we missed in the main cleanup. Small stuff like that that makes a big difference in the way the car looks. Plus we have a decal up here to fix, and we're going to repair that to keep the factory appearance. This isn't going to be a concours car. This isn't a restoration. If anything, it's a preservation of a very nice low mileage vehicle. So that takes a little time, and we wind up with a very nice, inexpensive little convertible to drive. And we've checked the plugs, re-gapped them. They're all ready to be hooked back up once we have the pieces. Again, this gives you a real good idea of all the hoses and attachment pieces, and behind here is the distribution box for all these components. You can see how we had to run other lines. And once it's all done, then we're in great shape to put the valve cover on, and we're finished. We can fire it up, provided we have no oil leaks to continue to chase. We've finished in the engine bay, other than, as I said, a little bit of detailing here and there to clean it up. We're also going to touch up the wipers, of course, and this particular piece, the underplate, the wipers, and up here. Get it all nice and pretty. Then close the hood, and that's done. I believe the only thing we have left on the drivability issue now is the speedometer. The cable attachment point's broken. I have a spare housing, so we'll change that out. And we've pretty well nailed everything on it. She'll be ready to go for a test drive, and we'll see how things work out. So we'll be back in a couple days when the parts arrive. In the meantime, you have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.